All right, my name is Lucy Fischer-West, and I was born in Catskill, New York, but I was raised in El Paso, Texas. In 1970, I married a man who was born in El Paso, but mostly raised with Southern cooking. And so, as a new bride, I decided, well, you know, like most women, you want to learn to cook the things that the people that you care about like. And one of the things that he really, really loved was chicken and dumplings. So, in order to figure out a way for these chicken and dumplings to be mine instead of his mom's, I had to put my own little twists on the recipe. The one staple for whatever recipe I found for chicken and dumplings was that you have to have, don't laugh, a chicken. No, you had to have a good amount of chicken, and your dumplings were going to be made of Bisquick. And the best place to find Bisquick recipes was a Bisquick cookbook. Back in the old days, when some of you who are watching this were not born, you would buy a box of Bisquick and they would give you a recipe book. They would give you a recipe book in multiple at multiple times in multiple boxes, and by the time you got through, say, 6 months of using Bisquick, you had a cookbook. I did not like the two recipes for chicken and dumplings straight out of a Bisquick cookbook. One was called chicken fricassee and dumplings, and in that particular recipe, you floured the chicken, you cut up the raw pieces of chicken, you fricasseed it, you rolled it in flour, and then you pan fried it. Then you put it in the broth, and so as it cooked, then that gave you the thickness that you wanted for it. But I didn't really want to fry the chicken first. The other recipe was called herbed dumplings with chicken, which suited me a little bit more because, you know, I was used to cooking a chicken for multiple things. Chicken for chicken tacos, chicken for mole, chicken for this, chicken for that. And so it suited me a whole lot better to take a whole chicken and boil it until it fell off the bone. My usual recipe, if you can call it that, for boiling a chicken is a lot of water. For this recipe, you need a lot of broth, a lot of water, and bay leaves, garlic, usually a head of garlic, pepper, and salt. That's what generally I cook the chicken with. And what you see here is a chicken that was cooked yesterday. So I cook the chicken, I take it out, I debone it, and then I take all of the broth and cool it, put it in the fridge overnight so that I can skim the fat off it. Now, a more sensible person, a person who is watching his weight, etc., is not going to use the chicken fat from the broth. I use it because saving a little bit of calories on the oil that you use for this recipe is not going to do you a whole lot of good because it is a comfort food. Chicken and dumplings is a comfort food. And so I've got my rendered fat from the chicken, put it into a hot skillet, and that's when I'm going to saute my onions and a little bit of garlic in. Okay, so my next step is to saute some onions in that chicken fat. And saute them until they are pretty clear and not burnt. You don't want to burn your onions because by the time you're through with this dish, it should be pretty ivory colored. You don't want anything in there that's not ivory colored. I can't tell you how much of an onion this is. In my vision of fixing chicken and dumplings for this particular task, I figured I needed enough onions to cover the bottom of the pan that I was cooking in, because that way they would, I didn't want to exceed that because then they wouldn't cook evenly. And I'll let those saute for a little bit. It takes a longer time for onions to saute than it takes for garlic, and I certainly do not want to burn the garlic. So I have a quirky kitchen. My stove has never been level. I've been living in this house since 1974 and have yet to level the stove. And so I will turn this pan around several times so that all the onions get sauteed evenly. Right about now, when you're making this dish, your whole house should smell like onions, like sauteed onions. Making a little space in there. Okay, chicken and dumplings, for the most part, are very bland. And the chicken and dumpling recipes that I've ever looked at really don't have any garlic in them. But because I'm a firm believer that garlic is not only flavorful but healthy, I add a little tiny bit. I add maybe 2 cloves of garlic to this chicken that I'm cooking. In there. Now your dish should smell like onion and garlic. Okay, you don't want to be too far away from it as you cut your chicken. I use the whole chicken. It gives it a good combination of the white meat and the dark meat. I don't cut it too small, because if you do that, in my mind, then as it cooks, it's going to fall apart on you, and you really don't want to have a whole lot of mush. So don't cut your chicken too small. Okay, that looks about right. The next step is putting the chicken broth into this concoction of fried onions and garlic, sauteed onions and garlic. You want to get your heat up as quickly as possible. The sauteed onions are now floating in this mixture, and this broth that I'm putting in there is already hot. And this is where you got to just eyeball what you're doing, okay? Because you're going to want to have all of this chicken floating in this chicken broth mixture. But you want to have enough broth in there that when you put the dumplings in there, the dumplings are not going to use up all of your broth. So I'm going to start with that. And I'm going to give this a little bit of a mix. This is canned cream of chicken with my added broth. And that's going to be what thickens all of this. If you wanted to make this chicken and dumplings more vegetable packed, you can put sliced carrots in it, you can put celery in it, saute the celery just like you would the onions. The people that I have served chicken and dumplings to are purists. They think that chicken and dumplings should have two things: chicken and dumplings. So I don't put any vegetables in here. This is not a vegetarian dish. Just isn't. Okay. All right. I'm going to wait for that to bubble a little bit. Let it bubble. Let it thicken a little bit while I finish chopping up this chicken. All right, so this is thickened enough that I'm happy with it. It'll thicken some more when we put dumplings in it. That's why I have saved some of this hot chicken broth over here, just in case we need it. At this point in the cooking, you want to keep it bubbling. It needs to be a sustained bubble, for lack of a better word. It needs to simmer. You have to have it simmering when you start putting the dumplings in, so that the dumplings cook as quickly as they should. So you don't want to put dumplings in before your chicken is heated through and before all the chicken goes in. Okay. Gonna let that simmer a little bit, let it thicken a little bit while we get all of this off the table and mix the dumplings. All right, the next part of this process is fairly simple. This is Bisquick, and the dumpling recipe, the dumpling proportions of Bisquick to milk are the same as biscuits, regular biscuits to milk. The only thing that's going to change here is what you put in the Bisquick, because ultimately what you put in the dumpling mixture is going to flavor your chicken and dumplings dish. So I have here a little poultry seasoning. So I'm putting in about half a teaspoon of poultry seasoning. I'm putting in a tiny, less than that, of paprika, just to give it a little bit of color. And I'm putting in all of that tarragon. I need more tarragon. I misjudged on the tarragon. I need more tarragon. Okay, chicken and dumpling recipes tend to tell you to use parsley. Maybe because parsley is a more common herb. Maybe because it is a less expensive herb. I like to use tarragon. I think tarragon gives it a smoother flavor. I think it gives it more flavor than putting just parsley in it. I think the parsley in the original recipe is intended to just make it look like it's got herbs in it, but doesn't really give it much flavor. And the reason I do paprika in here is because in that recipe that I mentioned early on that said that the chicken fricasseed, the fricasseed chicken with the dumplings, when you flour the chicken, you put paprika in it. And so it's just a little tiny bit of flavor to it. I'm going to reach for my Bisquick because I need to put some Bisquick on this board to keep it all from sticking. 2/3 cup of milk to 2 cups of Bisquick. Okay, so your basic recipe is 2 cups of Bisquick to 2/3 cup of milk. If you do that, then your dough is going to be really, really, really sticky, because the most common variation for chicken and dumplings is once you mix this, to take a spoonful of it and drop it in there. Don't like it that way. We don't like it that way because it winds up being too doughy. And besides that, the history behind my making chicken and dumplings is because my husband liked them so much. And his mother never made them drop. Made them like drop dumplings. She rolled them out really thin, cut them, and then put them in small squares. And that really is a much better way of doing it in my mind, because you are assured of cooking the dumplings through. Okay, so this is just about perfect. If you work with Bisquick, don't be tempted to add flour to your board to keep things from sticking, because that alters what the Bisquick will do for you in a recipe. So you put Bisquick on your board. See? It's okay. And because this board is not big enough to handle all of that at once, I usually cut it in half. Pat it into a circle. And then roll it out. You want it to be pretty thin. Don't worry if it doesn't come out looking like a circle, because you're going to cut it all up anyway. Okay, so right. Before you put the dumplings in, You want to make sure that it has not stuck on the bottom. That's why being right close to your stove and your pan is the best way to do this. Saves you a lot of steps from going back and forth from things that you need. So, after much trial and error, I discovered that this is the best way to cut strips for chicken and dumplings. I'm going to make these little diamond shapes. My idea of a good chicken and dumpling final recipe is that you ought to be able to get a dumpling and a piece of chicken on the same spoon. So, the dumplings in there, I need a spatula to pull these up. So, if you don't want to stand there and do one little square at a time, this is the way I do it. And then you'll separate them in a bit. Give them some space. They should all be floating at this point. I'm taking a few minutes to get them separated so that they don't stick to each other. They generally don't stick to each other much, but you still want to kind of make sure that you're doing that. So, you saw me cutting the dumplings from a circle that was about a quarter to a third of an inch thick. And they should about quadruple in size. So there's your dumpling. And it's cooked all the way through. We've given it about 10 minutes without disturbing it. And so you are ready to eat. Okay, so you've got an ample amount of chicken, you've got an ample amount of dumplings, and I think the best way to eat them is to have little dumpling, little chicken, a little broth, and do it all. You might want to wait until it's cooled off a little bit so that you don't scorch your tonsils. Yep. I think we did it.